Good evening from Boston College. My name is Kathy Bailey. I teach Middle East and Central Asian Studies in the Political Science Department at BC, and I'm the director of the Gabelli Presidential Scholars Program. I welcome you to the show at 6, BC and the Common Good. The show at 6 features friends and members of the BC community discussing a range of issues affecting our world today, all revolving around the theme of the common good. Topics include how the BC community is responding to the effects of COVID-19, to the enduring challenges of the marginalized, to our own resiliency and solidarity, and to the enhancement of human dignity throughout the world. The show is based on the central insight of the common good. That is, that the resources that humanity has and needs must be shared equitably. For instance, today, each of us is called to promote the common good by social distancing, by wearing masks, by washing our hands. These practices, like other forms of solidarity, are not only for our own good, but for the good of the whole community. At the same time, the brutal killing of George Floyd and the protests that ensued have exposed systemic racism that endangers the lives of our brothers and sisters. We know that through solidarity and a commitment to the common good, we can beat the virus of COVID-19, but we must be no less committed to defeating the virus of racism that touches the lives of all of us and destroys the lives of so many. Before we meet tonight's guest, I want to mention that at 6:40, my co-host and I will ask our guests questions from the audience. Members of the audience can pose questions before 6:40 via the Q&A button at the bottom of the screen. Again, members of the audience can pose questions before 6:40 via the Q&A button at the bottom of your screen. Please identify yourself by name and relationship to Boston College. My co-host tonight is my colleague and friend, Tim Crawford, Associate Professor of Political Science, who specializes in international security. Good evening, Tim.
Hi, Kathy. Thank you, and everyone who is joining us. It's a pleasure to introduce our guest today, Ambassador Nicholas Burns. He's the Goodman Family Professor of the Practice of Diplomacy and International Relations at the Harvard Kennedy School. He's faculty chair of the Future of Diplomacy Project and also of the Project on Europe and the Transatlantic Relationship at the Kennedy School's Belfer Center for Science and International Affairs. Burns is executive director of the Aspen Strategy Group and Aspen Security Forum and senior counselor at the Cohen Group. He's chairman of the board of Our Generation Speaks, which is an organization that seeks to bring together young Palestinians and Israelis in common purpose. Burns served in the United States government as a career Foreign Service officer. He was the Undersecretary of State for Political Affairs from 2005 to 2008. That's the State Department's third ranking official. He was also US Ambassador to NATO, Ambassador to Greece, and State Department spokesman. He also worked on the National Security Council as a senior director for Russia, Ukraine, and Eurasia affairs, as special assistant to the President Clinton, and director for Soviet affairs for President George Herbert Walker Bush. Burns served in the American consulate in Jerusalem, where he coordinated US economic assistance to the Palestinian people in the West Bank, and before that, at the American embassies in Egypt and Mauritania. Most importantly, he received his undergraduate degree from Boston College, his master's degree from the School of Advanced International Studies, and an honorary doctorate from BC in 2002. So thank you, Ambassador Burns, for coming. My first question. Much of your professional life has been devoted to working within and promoting the development of what is sometimes called the transatlantic community, or perhaps more broadly, the liberal rules-based international order. And I'm sure that Like me, you've been struck by the extent to which, in recent weeks, anti-racism protests have spread around the movement inside the United States. And so my question is, does this reveal something significant about the vitality of the liberal international community, which in some respects has seemed to be fraying lately? And is there a social basis here or momentum in the wider liberal international community for some kind of new multilateral initiative to combat racism?
Well, first of all, Tim, Kathy, thank you. Professors, I should say quite formally, thanks very much for the invitation to be with you and to be with the BC community. I'm really delighted to be here. I'm a BC grad, class of 78. I have two daughters, Elizabeth 2008, Caroline 2012. They're loyal Eagles as well, so we're a BC family. Tim, I think you've started with the right question. In many ways, the United States is facing four big crises simultaneously, and I don't remember a time like this in our country since perhaps 1968 when I was a little kid. But we're facing the pandemic crisis, 115,000 people dead and counting. We're facing the economic crisis, obviously, with the highest unemployment since 1933, and a severe crisis for the year ahead. We're facing a leadership crisis around, and I'm not gonna pull many punches tonight. I think the substandard, I would say even disastrous leadership of Donald Trump as president. And we're facing this racial crisis, which is the most serious of all. All of us know that the United States has been fractured by race since our founding, since the first slave ship arrived in Virginia in 1619. I really admire the 1619 project that the New York Times has been running. Jill Lepore, Harvard historian, in her great book, These Truths, a one-volume, 800-page history of the United States, which came out about 2 years ago, identifies race as the central issue in the history of the American people. Ken Burns, no relationship, but I'm an admirer, told me once when I had him, I hosted him at the State Department for one of his films, the one on World War II. He said of the 26 or 27 films he'd made about the American people, he said race runs through almost all those films, from jazz to baseball to the Civil War to World War I and II. How could it not? So just by way of prologue, it is the most important issue we've dealt with. We do have systemic racism in the United States. We've got to get our arms around this, and it's a particular responsibility that we white Americans have to embrace the protest movement and to listen to people and to, I think, search in our minds. What can we do as individuals? What can we do at BC? What can we do at Harvard? In all of our communities, in our households, to be outward looking, to be generous, to be tolerant, but to be inclusive, and to create a society we can be proud of. And I think that's what people are protesting about in the United States, and that's what they're protesting about in Europe. I'll just say one thing, Tim. I really admired Father Leahy's letter that he sent to the BC community last week. When he said Black Lives Matter, he was speaking for everybody who's associated with Boston College. That includes me as an alumnus. I'm also on the board of trustees right now. When he announced the Forum on Racial Justice that our law school dean, Vince Rougeau, is going to coordinate and direct, that's a practical step forward for BC to have an ongoing conversation about race and to really examine our university and all of us in it. How can we contribute to improve the situation? When we think about Pine Manor and the Pine Manor Institute, most of those young people at that institute are first-generation kids. Most of them are kids who come from very poor, disadvantaged backgrounds. They finally have a chance, maybe the first person in their family to go to college. BC can help those kids. So there's a lot we can do. And the final thing I'd say is, I was mystified at first by the demonstrations in Europe because I couldn't quite understand, was it only about us? Were they trying to guilt trip us? And I could understand why they try to do that. We're disappointed in you, America, because you're supposed to be that city on a hill. You're the country that elected Barack Obama. You're the country that 60 years ago passed the Civil Rights and Voting Rights Acts of 1964 and 65. You corrected your original sin. And now you're showing us that you really didn't mean it. I thought that was part of what these European young people were doing. My daughter Caroline, BC 2012, has been living in Berlin for the last 2.5 years. And last Saturday, she joined the protest at Alexanderplatz, which is one of the central squares of Berlin. She said it was very German. Everybody had a mask on. You couldn't really social distance, but people were trying to be socially responsible, as Kathy reminded us at the beginning. And she said she was so proud to be there because she felt, as a young person, that the young Europeans and the young Americans understood each other, whether they were white or African American or whatever their ethnicity or religion were. And she felt an identity of views, and I think that's why people are protesting in Paris and in London and Berlin. They understand the power of the United States and the global community, particularly in the transatlantic community, because we're a community of values. We believe in liberalism, we believe in democracy, we believe in human rights, we certainly believe in treating people well that have been disadvantaged and have been put down by our own society. And I think that identity of views is what holds us together. You might think it's NATO or military, that's in part, or trade, but it's really that we believe our core values are consistent with each other and they bind us together. And that's powerful. And so I think we shouldn't be threatened by these young people in Europe or defensive about it. We should be encouraged that they're doing what Lincoln did, reminding us of the better angels of our nature.
I think the distinction you just made there, Nick, is really important and interesting. You talked about the moral leadership of, let's say, Boston College, something that is, of course, on the local level, and the empathy and the idea that we understand the pain, even though we might not have gone through it ourselves, but we get it. And like your daughter, many of our students are out there protesting, but at the national level, there just doesn't seem to be that kind of moral leadership that people might think of the United States as, instrumental in that leadership. And I wonder if you think that other countries like China, Russia, North Korea, which today just blew up the South Koreans' station that they share. Do you think that they now feel a little less hindered by, without that shining city on the hill as an example?
Oh, I think they do. Kathy, that's such a good question. It's such a searching question. We could organize a whole course at BC or Harvard around these first two questions. Maybe we should. I do think that the authoritarian countries feel emboldened. They feel that, I think quite correctly, they perceive we have a very weak president. He's not defending the core values of the country. One of the biggest issues globally right now is this ideological struggle. It's not exactly what it was during the Cold War, but it's reminiscent of it. Xi Jinping is just filled with self-confidence about the authoritarian model. And he's trying to convince a lot of people around the world, leaders in other countries, that's the right model to follow. We know that Putin's convinced of it. He has been his whole life. He's a KGB guy. We see even Viktor Orban, the leader of Hungary, a nominally democratic country in Europe, previously democratic, now turning authoritarian under his leadership. We see it in Erdogan in Turkey. So right inside the NATO alliance and inside the EU in the case of Hungary, but Turkey and Hungary in the case of NATO, we have authoritarian governments right now. And I think those authoritarian leaders don't quite get us though. Putin was crowing the other day in a staged press conference in Moscow. Look at those Americans. They can't even control their streets. They have millions of people protesting. He is so alien from the democratic tradition personally himself, not the Russian people, that he doesn't understand that those protesters, maybe some of the same people with us tonight, they're showing the strength of the United States. We're a self-confident democracy that people have First Amendment rights, that you're compelled, and I think BC would teach its students, under the Jesuit Catholic tradition, you're compelled to go into the streets to protest against injustice and racial inequality. You have to do it as a person of faith if you are a person of religion, or if you're an agnostic person who is driven by a set of core ethical values. That's an amazing, extraordinary strength of our democracy. And Putin, I think, and Xi Jinping see it as a weakness. I see it as a strength. The last thing I'll say, Kathy, is I don't want to be too political, and I apologize if I'm going to infuriate any Trump supporters on the call, but of all the president's failures, and I could probably catalog 2,000 to 3,000 if I had time to think about it, I would say, but I'm serious about this, I think his failure on race is his gravest failure. He is actively dividing the American people on race. He hasn't shown a shred of empathy for George Floyd's horrific murder, for the family, for the plight of African Americans, for the insecurity that they must feel as African Americans. They do feel in our society. And he leads all the American people, all 330 million of us. He should, but he's not. And to divide us on race after everything we've been through, when he has examples, Lyndon Johnson, a Southerner, who proclaimed, "We shall overcome," in his great civil rights speech to the Congress, who shepherded the Civil and Voting Rights Act through Congress. Abraham Lincoln, we have Martin Luther King, our best example. And Trump can't even begin to hold a candle to the moral fiber of those kind of leaders. And that's the great tragedy of his presidency.
Well, so I'll steal you for one more question, but I know Tim has a lot of them too. So, but I just wanted to briefly ask about, with your experience as the U.S. ambassador to NATO, what you think about the Atlantic Alliance. Angela Merkel just recently said she wouldn't come to Washington to the G7 summit. And then I guess in retaliation, President Trump cut about a third of the US troops stationed in Germany. The rift seems pretty deep on everything from Iran to Russia to trade. Do you think there's any possibility that this alliance will come back, can be healed, whether in the next few months of the Trump administration, a second Trump administration, or another in the future?
Well, I feel this one really personally and profoundly because I spent a lot of my diplomatic career working in the transatlantic relationship, working in the Soviet Union during the Cold War, ambassador to NATO on 9/11. So it's personal for me, as it is for a lot of people. This alliance we've had with Europe, specifically in NATO, but I would even preceded by the World War II alliance that we had with the United Kingdom and Winston Churchill, it's the most powerful alliance in global history. There's been nothing like NATO. And again, it's a major military alliance, but it's an alliance of values. We don't always measure up to those values, but at least we try. And we have a self-corrective part of our DNA in the alliance and in our own countries that makes us do better when we do falter. But this is the alliance that, beginning in 1941 with the foundational document, as a lot of historians have called it, of the West, which is the Atlantic Charter of Roosevelt, FDR, and Churchill, Roosevelt's Four Freedoms, all the way through the UN Declaration of Human Rights, the founding of the UN, the founding of NATO, the Cold War, the liberation of Eastern Europe. I mean, it goes on and on to this very day. It is such a powerful force for the United States. And I think it's true that China is probably, for the next few decades, going to be the biggest preoccupation for the United States. Mm-hmm. But 3 data points about our alliance with Europe and Canada. Number one, this is the leading trade partner of the United States, the European Union. Number 2, the leading investor in our economy is the European Union. Number 3, the leading number of American treaty allies in the world are in NATO. So you can see how profoundly important this alliance is to us. Donald Trump sees alliances, and it's very clear from his 3.5 years in office, as encumbering, slowing down, and complicating life from the United States, almost draining energy from us. He complains, I think Oliver Wendell Holmes said, a cynic is someone who knows the price of everything and the value of nothing. He complains about little things. Is Germany spending 1.3% or 1.5% of its GDP in defense. It owes us that money, which is not true factually. He doesn't get it that in the 21st century, it's the American alliances in the world that separate us from Russia. They don't have a single ally, and we have 29 allies in NATO. And in the Indo-Pacific, we have alliances, treaty alliances with Japan and South Korea and Australia, and security agreements with New Zealand, the Philippines, Thailand, Vietnam, and with India. And that gives us a power vis-a-vis China that the Chinese will never have. These alliances multiply American purpose and power in the world. And so when Trump tears them down, when he derides them as he's done, when he routinely castigates and criticizes in the most personal way Angela Merkel, who I think is the leader of the West right now. She's the leader who embodies these Western values in her life and in her work as Chancellor of Germany. It really brings shame on the United States. And it's shocking to me that we have a president who is denying NATO and tearing it down. So to answer your question, we can survive another half year.
Mm-hmm.
And if Joe Biden is elected, and I just hope and pray he will be on November 3rd, he will resurrect NATO and American participation and leadership in it. He is a resolute transatlanticist. If Trump wins, if President Trump wins and continues for another 4.5 years, I believe he could destroy NATO. And that would be a mortal sin in American diplomacy and American foreign policy. It will be a catastrophic era for the United States to walk away from the most successful alliance that has ever existed and that we've ever been involved in.
Thank you. I have a question that I guess flows from your points and Kathy's question, but I'm trying to open the aperture a little bit broader to take in sort of the broader the liberal international order. So NATO's one element, but all the multilateral institutions that were put into place in the early Cold War period and that have been developed and nourished over the years. And so as a professor who I've studied, I studied these things. And one of the things I try to think about how to communicate what this liberal international order is to students who it may feel like a very abstract thing.
Yeah.
And it's something that they've been immersed in their entire life. And so people say, well, fish don't know water. And if you've spent your whole life inside a robust, thriving, liberal international community, it might be hard to know what exactly is what you're getting out of it and what you might lose if you don't have it. And so I was wondering if you could maybe suggest some of the unique values or advantages that come from being embedded in this liberal international order, and also maybe what you think might be necessary and what must be done to sustain it.
Well, Tim, I'm smiling because I've asked the same question of my students. I teach a course, one of the courses I teach at Harvard is called Great Powers. We look at the constellation of great powers in the world and try to decide, can we actually work together to resolve big human problems like climate change? Can we avoid war? Or are we going to act as traditional great powers have acted and collide because of our interests and maybe descend into warfare? And at the beginning of the course, we talk about your question, the liberal international order. I assign parts of a book by a Princeton professor, John Eikenberry. It's called Liberal Leviathan. He wrote it in 2011. And it's an examination of the development of the liberal world order. And he has an evocative way to think about it. He says, look, I can paraphrase him. He says, there is a physical nature and there's a metaphysical nature to the liberal world order. You can see in all the international institutions, the UN and its tributary agencies, the regional development banks, the regional associations like the Organization of American States or the African Union or ASEAN. It's a physical being of institutions that have been largely created since the Second World War, largely inspired by the Americans and British at the beginning of this period, but then brought into by people all over the world that provide a set of rules, sometimes governing laws. They provide security, or in the case of the World Trade Organization, a way to arrange and formalize global trade, rules of the game that allow the global system, 195 nation states, 7.7 billion people, to work together in a reasonably stable way. I find that to be a compelling way to think about, think about a brain and a skeletal structure and arteries and veins and capillaries, and that's the international system. But very important, Tim, and you as I knew you would, you put the most important point on, it's a system of values. The liberal world order is grounded in the United Nations Declaration of Human Rights. That is centered on the rights of individuals, or on the United Nations Charter, which is centered on the rights of states, the inviolability of borders, for instance. And when a country like China joined the Security Council, the People's Republic of China, and succeeded Taiwan back in the early 1970s, they had to sign up to the liberal, humane, human rights values in those foundational documents. So did Putin. And of course, they don't live up to them, but we can hold them accountable. We can hold a dictator accountable. We can hold Donald Trump accountable. I will say this, an authoritarian figure like Donald Trump. So it's powerful. It's both physical. These are institutions that exist. There are offices and people in them, but it's also a set of values molded in the image of Eleanor Roosevelt, Franklin Delano Roosevelt, Jean Monnet, Winston Churchill, the victors of the Second World War, but now in images of people like Susan Rice and Condi Rice and, the Prime Minister of India and other democratic figures around the world. So it's well worth preserving. That's my very difficult attempt to kind of summarize Professor Eikenberry's good description of it.
So I want to change gears just a little bit and bring you to the Middle East. This is one of your many areas of expertise, and you speak Arabic. So you know the area.
Broken, fractured, 30-year-old Arabic, Kathy.
Well, we have a really good Arabic department at BC. Want to come back?
I take a remedial class at Boston College.
Okay. There's a lot happening in the Middle East. And one of the things you're involved with is Our Generation Speaks, which I think we'd all love to hear more about that. But I'm wondering if you could talk about the Middle East almost, I'm throwing all of it in there all together, but to break it down a little, we have the Trump-Kushner peace plan.
Yeah.
We have the withdrawal from the Iran nuclear deal. We still have the situation in Syria that, it doesn't hit the news as much as it did, but it's a dire situation. We have the economy of Lebanon in a dangerous downward spiral. And I could go on and on with the problems that the Middle East presents. Can you talk about the Middle East a bit and give us your take on what's happening and what should be done?
I wish I'd taken your class so I can give you a better answer. I know that you are the specialist in the Middle East. My wife Libby and I, Libby was not employed by the US government, but obviously we were together throughout my entire career. We got started early. We went as 24-year-olds to Mauritania, West Africa, Arab Muslim country. Lived 2 years in Egypt, in Cairo, 2 years in Jerusalem, where I coordinated our economic aid program for Palestinians. All this in the 1980s, long time ago. But I've gone back and back as a diplomat and worked on lots of different aspects of this. And I must say, I can't remember a more distressing, violent, unstable time than now for the 22 Arab states, Israel and Iran, the countries that comprise Turkey, the modern Middle East. If you think about it, and I'm sure your course covers all this, civil wars in failed states and insurrections in Yemen and Syria and Iraq, and now Lebanon, unfortunately, and Libya. Massive human suffering. Of the 22.4 million Syrians, at one point in the last couple of years, 12 million of them were homeless. There were 7 million homeless inside their country. The UN calls them internally displaced people. It's a terrible antiseptic phrase. They're homeless. bombed out of their homes, just trying to survive because they're Sunni in a Shia area, or Alawite or Alawites in a Sunni area, or Kurds. Think of the human suffering in Aleppo, this vicious bombing by Russia and the Syrian government of Bashar al-Assad of innocent civilians in the northern towns of Syria. As they try to drive people out, they kill thousands of people just to occupy the territory as the refugees flee. And think of the suffering of the Libyan people right now, or the people in Yemen with the cholera and polio outbreaks and the food shortages there. So no end of human suffering. I think a lot of us felt lifted up in 2011 when we saw the Arab Spring, the Arab young people take to the streets in those short-lived, very hopeful citizens' revolutions, kind of almost reminiscent of what's happening now in the States. Young people taking control and challenging their elders, people like me, to do better for society. But most of those young people have had the idealism snuffed out of them, or they've been imprisoned in places like Egypt. So what a terrible time for the Middle East right now. And I guess I'd say on two of the issues you mentioned very quickly, because we could spend months, if not years, on this topic, and I know you do, is I think it was a great mistake for President Trump to leave the Iran nuclear deal. It wasn't perfect, but we had denied Iran the two routes to a nuclear weapon. It's in the production of fissile material. You enrich uranium and you process plutonium. And we had deconstructed all their facilities and had 24/7 IAEA, International Atomic Energy eyesight on their facilities. They were not going to be able to produce the fissile material for a nuclear weapon for a good 15, 20 years. And President Trump just cavalierly, I'm pretty sure he never read the entire JCPOA agreement. He threw it away. And then I think committed the cardinal mistake. He replaced it with nothing. So now you have a situation where the United States is alienated from Britain, France, Germany, Russia, China, our negotiating partners. The Iranians are off the hook. All the constraints are off because the deal's over. They're now enriching uranium. We're kind of back to square one. I was the Iran negotiator for the George W. Bush administration, and we didn't get to the table. We just sanctioned the Iranians. President Obama got them to the table with the incredible work of my friend Ambassador Wendy Sherman and Secretary John Kerry. And the president threw it all away, and I think that's a shame. In the nuclear realm, but their support for violence and instability in Yemen, Syria, Iraq, Lebanon, and Gaza. I think quickly on the Palestinian front, I've always supported, like most people in government, a two-state solution, an Israeli state with a capital in West Jerusalem, a Palestinian state eventually with a capital in East Jerusalem, in the Arab part, the Palestinian part of Jerusalem. And, you know, it's been the most elusive negotiation mirage, if you will, in diplomatic life since 1948, when this all started, May 14th, 1948. Peace is very far away. The Israelis are led by a leader who is not interested in peace, Benjamin Netanyahu. He's interested in total victory over the Palestinians. And the Palestinians are fractured. I was in the West Bank and Jerusalem in November and December on two separate trips of 2019. And they're as far from peace, the Palestinians. So it's not a great time to put a peace effort together, but President Trump's plan is entirely one-sided. It gives Prime Minister Netanyahu everything he wanted. It denies the Palestinians everything they wanted. And it was worked out in conjunction only with Israel, not with the Palestinians, the first such diplomatic effort since 1948 that did not involve the Palestinians. And so we can talk more about that. I'm chairman of the board of Our Generation Speaks. It's a Boston-based nonprofit that funds and finances joint ventures in the West Bank, in Gaza, and in Israel between young Israelis and young Palestinians. And they're incredible people. They want to take the future in their own hands. They're people who believe in a common future for Israelis and Palestinians, and we bring them to Brandeis for 3 months of business training. We help to finance their initial businesses, joint ventures. It's really difficult to make a business succeed in the draconian world of the West Bank under the Israeli military occupation. It's even more difficult in Gaza because both Hamas and the Israelis are difficult. But these young people will not take no for an answer. They see a common future between the two peoples. and they want to build it from the ground up. So that's why I'm involved. I was asked by Deval Patrick, who was the former chair, if I would succeed him, and I did it with some trepidation because I just didn't know what I could offer. But with the contributions of the Boston Jewish community, with the Muslim community, with people like Bob Kraft, who's been incredibly generous to us, and his son Dan Kraft, we're able to give these young people at least a chance to build a better future. So if people are interested, they can go to our website, OGS, Our Generation Speaks. Thank you.
Thanks, Nick.
Ambassador Burns, I wanted to shift gears to back to sort of the undergraduate education experience and ask you if you had any thoughts about how your BC education and experience affected your career in diplomacy or in high politics and government. Well,
I knew that we didn't rehearse this, Tim and Kathy and I, but I did get the questions ahead of time. So Tim, I was thinking about this. And I guess the thing that came foremost into my mind is I arrived at Boston College 46 years ago. I can't believe I'm that old. As an 18-year-old from Wellesley, I was a commuter. Back then, BC was more of a Northeast school. Massachusetts, New York, New Jersey, Pennsylvania. We had maybe half, I'm just guessing, maybe half the states had students. Now BC is a completely different, and I think a better place. We're much more diverse. We have a much higher HANA, Latino, African American, Asian American component of the school, and both in the student body and faculty. We were quite homogeneous group ethnically and racially back then, but we love BC. I commuted my first semester because there wasn't enough housing and it killed me. But that's the answer to your question. Because I was a commuter, I just studied probably more than I would have had I been living in the dorms as an 18-year-old of my freshman year. And I just remember how demanding the courses were. Father Phil Molesky in freshman English and Professor Perry and Heinemann, two of these stalwart historians in the BC faculty for European history. And then my sophomore year, David Ray in political science. They made us work really hard, and I needed that. I was a irresolute high school student. I studied what I wanted to, and I didn't study what I didn't want to. Not a very good recipe for a high school student. BC drilled into me the need for hard work, that, they were going to expect us to read in history classes 200 pages a week and thought nothing of it. And I was challenged to rise to that. And I'm glad that they challenged that young 18-year-old. Secondly, Tim, I really think the core is important. The core to me embodies what BC is all about. That whether you're in the School of Management or whether you want to be a physics major, everybody should be doing English and history and a social science and a foreign language. And then the young history majors and political science majors, where you two teach, they ought to be doing some science, especially given the role of technology in the modern world. And they ought to be economically literate before they leave Boston College. And so I think the core is the key to BC. We want to educate protean young women and young men, well-rounded Renaissance people, and BC gives you that chance. I really deeply believe in the core. And finally, in answer to this great question, I'm Catholic, and I was a devout Catholic when I was at BC, and was raised by my mom and dad and family to be a devout Catholic. And I think BC, the core of Jesuit Catholic values, is just so important for our Catholic and non-Catholic students. I think there are a lot of friends I had at BC. I had some friends who were Jewish, other friends Protestant, many agnostic, a couple of atheistic friends as young people. And I think that those values work for everybody. And BC, I think, as a tolerant place, needs to understand that in a modern student body, you're not going to get a lot of all people who are religious, but you can reach people through in service to others. The creed that you have to give something back to the world. And so those values, I think, are important for all of us who are teaching at BC or former students like myself.
So just quickly, because I know we want to turn to the audience questions, but Tim and I, and Tim is our Director of Undergraduate Studies, well, until until this semester, I think.
Yeah,
He
2 years.
resigned, right? Okay. No, he did it for a very long time. And, we're interested in helping our students with careers. What advice would you give the students who are listening tonight about careers in diplomacy and specifically in the State Department?
Well, please, if you're interested in global politics and American foreign policy, and if you want to serve the country, you have a couple choices. You can go, if you're not an ROTC, you can go to Quantico and become a Marine Corps officer after graduation, go to Officers Candidate School. You can go into the CIA and engage in really important intelligence work. If you want to deal with global events at the highest level, if you want to negotiate war and peace treaties, take care of American citizens overseas, if you want to help American businesses to succeed in a pretty hostile, competitive global landscape, the State Department does that. I was in the Foreign Service for 27 years. My wife, Libby, and our 3 daughters lived in 5 different parts of the world, 5 very different countries. Our daughters, 2 of them graduated from international high schools overseas. It was just a compelling experience for all of us. And I just felt, for me as a young BC student, I came of age, I entered in 1974. So I entered 3 weeks after Richard Nixon resigned. And Watergate was a defining issue for my high school years, as was the Vietnam War, which concluded the American part of it my junior year in high school. And I was a young liberal who wanted to play a very small part, along with many other people in my generation, to redeem America after the sins of the Vietnam War, the catastrophe of the Vietnam. And boy, do young Americans now have that motivation. If you think about our racial struggles, the corruption of our current administration, the mistakes we've made in Iraq and Afghanistan, particularly Iraq, we have a lot that we have to do with our power. And so the State Department's a great place to contribute to our country, and we need you. And I just quote Theodore Roosevelt. Google, if you're a student, you're interested. He gave in his post-presidency a speech at the Sorbonne in May 1910. It's called the Man in the Arena speech. We'll modernize him and call him the person in the arena. That's the woman too. And he basically says in this speech, the credit belongs to the person in the arena of public life, the public square, who's going in to do battle on behalf of an idea or a country. And even if the credit is not the critic who counts, not people like me sitting on the outside commenting. It's people in the arena of public service whose faces are marred by dust and sweat and blood, who may fail. And here's the key line: if they fail, at least fail while daring greatly, so that their place shall never be with those cold and timid souls who know neither victory nor defeat. And I just love that line, because what Teddy Roosevelt was saying to you and to me and to all of us was, if you want to change the world, you need to go into the public arena and try to change it. You can't just sit in the sidelines. And I think for BC students imbued by our values, that's a pretty good thing to think about as you think about your careers. And I have students at Harvard come into me and they say, I've got 2 job offers. One is to work for Goldman Sachs for $1 trillion a year. The other is to work for the Sisters of Mercy in Calcutta. What should I do? I say, make your first trillion, but when you make that first trillion, if that's what you really want to do, go into business, end your business career and do something, create a nonprofit, teach in the public school system of Boston, work for the Sisters of Mercy in Calcutta, do something for your heart and your values. And I think the great thing about our society is we're such a flexible workforce and a flexible economy that young people can think about 2 or 3 or 4 acts in their life, not just one career, but 2 or 3 or 4. And so people shouldn't feel guilty about going into business. Business runs we wouldn't have the country we have without the American business community or the international business community, but we also want to do something for our values. You can do both in your life. That's my advice to my students. What do you both say to your students when they ask you that same question?
Let's turn to the students, actually. We've got some questions coming in, and so I will present the first question. This is from Gage Higgins, a rising sophomore at BC, who asks, Mr. Ambassador, do you see Russia or China or either, Russia or China, as the more concerning long-term adversary of the United States, and why? How should our foreign policy cater to promoting liberalism throughout the globe in the face of these kinds of authoritarian governments?
What a great question, Gage. Thank you. I would say that both Russia and China for the next decade, so the beginning of your professional career, are going to be major adversaries to the United States. Russia, because it's still a major nuclear weapons power, it's developing hypersonic weapons. It's violating most of the arms control agreements that it signed up to in the 70s, 80s, 90s, and into this decade. And so we're living in a lawless, Wild West world, very insecure of nuclear instability. And Putin has shown that he is capable of invasion and annexation of other people's territory. He's ruthless. And so we got to keep NATO strong and protect our NATO allies, Estonia, Latvia, Lithuania, Poland, up on the Russian border. But I do think for the most of your working lifetime, and you're a young guy at 18, 19 years old, probably a sophomore in college, China's going to be the compelling adversary for the United States. And I would just set the challenge this way. China's going to be our major economic competitor, trade competitor. It'll compete with us for military predominance in the Indo-Pacific, which is going to be the most important part of the world economically and technologically. Japan, India, China, the US is Pacific orientation. It's competing with us ideologically. We talked about Xi Jinping promoting the authoritarian model. So we're going to have to compete and yet avoid a catastrophic war. That's going to take intelligence, dexterity, and humanity on the part of our leaders. And we're also going to have to cooperate with them. We can't paint China with the word enemy, because it's not an enemy. It's a competitor or adversary or rival. It's not an enemy. If we want to do anything about climate change, we're the two leading carbon emitters. We got to work with China. How about pandemics? We're the two countries with greatest epidemiological capacity and public health capacity to help ourselves and the rest of the world, China. How about stabilizing the global economy during a great recession of the type we're in now? We're two of the three, along with the EU, largest economies. And so we're going to have to both compete with China and cooperate and do both simultaneously. And that's going to take young people like you, study Mandarin, spend your junior year in Shanghai or Beijing or Wuhan or someplace like that, visit China, befriend the Chinese students at Boston College. They're your classmates. They're not your enemies. They're there to open them up to the liberal American value set. I think that's going to be the consuming issue for your generation.
Thank you for saying that, Nick, because, I think where the administration is going is to, to gloss China as the enemy and blame, there's a blame game that can't possibly go in any good direction, and diplomacy is necessary, as you know. I'm preaching to the choir. So this is from Aidan O'Neill, also a rising sophomore at BC, and he asks, what do you see as the greatest barrier to true international cooperation on aggressively combating climate change?
So, and just one more word from that, from Gage's question. In diplomacy, when I was a practicing diplomat, you hardly ever use the word enemy, because in diplomacy, enemy is somebody you're going to fight. I mean, you might conceivably use it towards North Korea, an unrestrained bellicose North Korea attacking Japan. You'd say that's an enemy, and therefore we have a legitimate right and reason to use force. We never use the word enemy against China or even Iran. They're adversaries. And so that word is a fully charged word. Aidan, great question. You might look at the book 21 Lessons for the 21st Century by an Israeli historian, Yuval Noah Harari. Incredible guy. I've never met him, but boy, is he smart. And I read it over Christmas, New Year's. And in it, he says a lot of things about the future. He says that humankind is facing existential threats. And not in this order. He says nuclear weapons are an existential threat. He thinks the combination of artificial intelligence and biotech, if it's misused ethically or by a hostile state, could be an existential threat. Technologies developed that could destroy human life. But first on his list is climate change. The greatest threat to humankind's ability to do something about it and arrest the progress of the change and to diminish our carbon emissions is the United States of America. Because of the 195 states in the world, there are 194 of them members of the Paris Climate Change Agreement. There's exactly one that's out, the United States. Ironically, our carbon emissions are diminishing. We're going to meet our Paris 2030 targets mainly because the market is pricing coal out of business, and coal's being replaced by a combination of natural gas and also wind power. Texas, the great petro state of the United States, is the largest wind power state in the United States. So the United States is the biggest problem because we've got the only climate change community in the world in our government. The Trump administration, and I'm sorry to say this, it sounds partisan, but it's true. The some of the Republican leaders in the Senate and House are climate change deniers. There's no other country in the world where the leadership of the country is denying the problem, so we're the biggest problem. And I'm confident that if Joe Biden's elected, I know that Joe Biden will put us right back into Paris. He'll have a serious program to try to diminish our carbon emissions further, to try to engineer a mid and long-term transformation of our economy. My students said to me at the end of our Great Powers class just in May, last month, they said, several of them from around the world, I had 16 nationalities in my class, why can't we create a carbon-free world, our generation, by 2050? And so I guess I'd say to you, Aidan, you can be part of that. And we Americans need to get with it and row in the same oar with the rest of the world and be part of this as the leading economy and co-leader of carbon emissions with China.
Okay, so kind of returning to some of the issues we were talking about at the beginning of the show, Ash Weir-Akun, who's a sophomore at Boston College, asks, now this is a great question. If there was one course you could design at Boston College to help combat racist ideology and racial biases from an international perspective, which readings would you assign?
Wow. Boy, Ash, you are really challenging me. That is a great question, Tim. I know that because I'm on the board and I'm on the Academic Affairs Committee with our great provost, David Quigley. We've been learning about on our committee, and Tom Childs has been teaching us too, by the way, about the core and how the core has been being transformed. I guess the way I'd answer Ash's question is say BC's got it right in what it's doing with modernizing the core. I think, Ash, what I would suggest, and I'd have to think about this more to give you a better answer, we all need to know more about the history of racial inequality in the United States. And it starts at the very beginning of our story back in the early 1700s, just before the Pilgrims arrived. We've been fractured by race since then. I would ask BC, I want a course that takes BC students through the history of race in America for the last 400 years. And then maybe combine it with our best BC minds in the theology and philosophy departments. What does Islam teach us about this? If we're Muslim, how can we think in a more humane way? What does Judaism teach us? What does Hinduism teach us? What does Catholicism or Episcopalianism teach us? Combine religion and history so that we're learning about the extraordinary inequality in our society, the savage, brutal mistreatment of the African American population of this country, and it continues right until the present moment. How could you look at that horrific video, 9-minute video of George Floyd's death and not feel that it represents millions of deaths of African Americans before him in the last 400 years? All the lynchings, all the slaves mistreated, all the prisoners in our jails right now unfairly convicted of crimes that they didn't commit, and on and on. And then combine that with what are our values, our human values, no matter what faith you are? Tell us about this. What are our obligations as women and men? I'd take that course.
Mhm.
if BC created, I'd come over and audit it because we all need to be to learn about this.
Okay, well, we're approaching the time where we wrap up. So let me just say again, thank you so much, Ambassador Burns, for joining us. And thank you to my colleague and friend, Professor Bailey, for helping to bring this all together with us. And to everyone out there in the audience for joining us this evening for what I think has been a really fabulous discussion. Before we say goodbye, I want to take a moment to preview the next segment of the show at 6, which is coming this Friday, June 19th, 6 to 7 p.m. Same time, same place. The theme of Friday's show is homelessness. And the featured guests will be Roseanne Haggerty, President of Community Solutions, and Dr. James O'Connell, who's President of Boston Healthcare for the Homeless Program. The hosts for Friday's show will be Father James Keenan, who's the Canisius Chair of the Theology Department and Vice Provost for Global Engagement and Director of the Jesuit Institute. And the other host will be Luke Murphy from the BC class of 2020. I guess before we close, I should remind you finally that to participate in these in the Friday program, you need to register in advance. So for each of the shows, you need to register if you want to attend. And as you know, the registration is very brief, but each segment has a different webinar link. So please check out our webpage at bc.edu/show@6 and see the next segments that are coming up. So I wrapped up a little bit early, but with that, I need to say, be well and stay safe, and good night from Boston College.
I just want to say thank you, Tim. Thank you, Kathy. Thank you, Father Jim Keenan. I was remiss in not thanking him earlier. And thanks to everybody who was online with us tonight. I really enjoyed the conversation.
Thank you so much. Good night.
Thank
Good
you.
night.